You had me at Jello, Jello. You had me at Jello. You had me at Jello. Oh, you had me at Jello.
Hi, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. And you know what that means. Before we get to practicing in earnest, we get another edition of Cello Chat. And with me this week is Dr. David Starkweather. How are you doing, Professor Starkweather?
I'm doing great. It's the middle of the summer and a very relaxed time at the moment.
Much needed. Well, for our viewers, would you tell about your musical background? How did you even get started and how did you get to where you are today?
Certainly. Well, I grew up in a family that was very classical music oriented. So Saturday morning, I'd wake up and hear a Brahms symphony or a Tchaikovsky symphony on the phonograph. And so I had that kind of background. And my grandmother, my father's mother, was a violinist. So it skipped a generation, really. My father was a professional psychologist and professor of psychology. And my mother was very interested in outdoor education and environmental aspects of the world. But in fourth grade, everyone was given, well, I would say they selected the A students and gave us a hearing test. And those of us who did well on distinguishing which note was higher or lower were shown the string instruments. And so at that point, I just chose the biggest one, is what my mother says. There were 5 of us in my fourth grade class, and by 6th grade, I was the only one left. But there was a lady who gave me private lessons during lunch hour, and I was really enjoying it. So I started taking private lessons every Friday afternoon with a teacher in the area. And it just went on like that. I enjoyed it. And in high school, I was in 3 orchestras most of the time, and played in the Marin Youth Orchestra. This was near San Francisco in Marin County. So I grew up in a very nurturing environment for that. But it was never my sole purpose in life or anything like that. That happened to me later. I went to UC Davis as a freshman and won their concerto competition. And I thought, oh, this is fun. I was playing Boccherini B-flat concerto, and got off to a good start that way with really enjoying a concerto performance. I did a full recital the following year and transferred to Eastman School of Music. And from there, I was just very single-minded about things. I ended up then doing my graduate studies with Bernard Greenhouse at Stony Brook, both master's and doctorate. And right out of school, age 27, I got the job at the University of Georgia. After 2 years, I took a semester off and went to Switzerland and studied with Pierre Fournier for 6 months. And that was my most intense period of practicing. I was doing 6 or 6.5 hours a day. And, you can't do much else if you're doing that much. You're eating, sleeping, getting a little exercise, and practicing like crazy. And I went to some international competitions after that. My best success was at Tchaikovsky Competition in 1986. And I was a semifinalist there. So had some great experiences along the way, of course, and ended up just staying at the University of Georgia all of my career. The program here at the university changed drastically over the years. I started out with 3 students. One was a new doctoral student who wanted to study with me. One was a music ed sophomore who ended up with a business degree. And another one was an art major senior who really had no sense of pitch or rhythm. So that was where things started here. And of course, I built a studio and recruited like crazy, visiting high schools. And then we got a new building in 1996. That was like a turning point for the whole school. When I joined the faculty, I think we had about 30 faculty here, but now we have 65 or so. It's really grown. And the building is tremendous. We have wonderful concert halls. So that's been an inspiration to keep going. So this is coming up on my 40th year here.
That's great. Now, we've had some of the previous guests have been greenhouse students, but none have been Fournier students. How would you compare their styles of teaching?
Well, in one respect, rather similar. They both wanted to sit and hear me play, and then would have very specific comments on certain passages, or general focus on maybe one overall kind of focus. Like I remember many times hearing Bernard Greenhouse say, "Stop worrying about intonation, make music." He was really big on the musicality of what you're doing, and just to put everything else aside and aim for that. But Fournier tended to be, I was his last student, and so he was very elderly. He sat next to his cello, but rarely picked it up. And the lessons were huge. They were like 2.5 or 3 hours long. I had 10 lessons like that. So each lesson had an entire concerto and another additional piece in it, and with a pianist accompanying me. So he was often very pleased and would just say, "Oh, that was lovely, keep going," or whatever. And then he would get to a certain passage and have me do it over and over, and never satisfied. So very different style in that respect. Bernard Greenhouse, Bernie was my mentor above all. He was a human being who could see and perceive other people's trials very easily. He could just look into a person's heart, I think. And this was really meaningful for me. I went through a sort of difficult breakup at that point when I was studying with him. And in that lesson, the first thing he said to me after I'd tuned was, "I can see we're not going to talk about cello today." Just right to the heart of it. I mean, I was wearing my heart on my sleeve, I'm sure, but still, he was wonderful. Just a great mentor. And I visited him at his house many times, played on his Strat a lot, and just really benefited from the whole relationship.
Nice. Now, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so we got him to come to the University of Georgia once, and he did 2 wonderful masterclass sessions. So he was just a terrific person in my life.
Excellent. But speaking of his Stradivarius, you have been playing on the same cello for a long time.
I have.
There must be a story behind how you found this Vuillaume.
Well, I was fortunate to find it when it was not expensive. I mean, that's the bottom line. I was a student at Eastman, and Robert Sylvester was sending me down to Française to find an instrument. And the first one I looked at was, I think, 8,900. And I brought it back to Rochester, wasn't so happy with it, tried it in the halls and all. And so I went back and I said, well, just for comparison, what's the next step up from this? And the Vuillaume was the next one they handed me. And I just fell in love with the instrument. I went out to a phone booth in Manhattan and called my father with my heart up in my throat. And he said, well, the money from your grandmother's violin is still in the family and we can use it for this cello. She had a Sanctus Seraphim violin, which was sold in 1940 for $10,000. So I was very fortunate to get this cello. At that time, it was $20,000. And now it's like $620,000.
Wow, way to go.
Well, yeah, there's appreciation for you. But I went back to Jacques Francais and I said, well, can you throw in a case with it? And he said, oh no, if you bring it back and say you're not buying it, I'm raising the price to $25,000. So it's like, okay, I'll get a case.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah. Most recently, I've been buying a couple of very nice bows, and I've found that it makes a real huge difference. I mean, I had a decent bow that I found during the time I was studying with Greenhouse, but it was a no-name French bow. And now I have a Sartori and a Voisin, and it makes me want to play all of my repertoire over again and just, re-experience all those pieces with those bows.
Okay, now I got to do another follow-up then. I recently listened to your recording of the Kadai solo sonata, in which you and the cello sound wonderful. Was that with one of the new bows?
No, that was before I got these two bows.
Oh, wow. I can see. Yeah. I mean, if it was that good, then to revisit it with something that you like even better. Wow.
Well, this bow I have is a no-name. It came from an interesting provenance, a widow of Villeky. Do you know who? I think his first name was Wilhelm Villeky. He was a New York cellist, and he edited the Schirmer edition of Dvorak Concerto. But he was the owner of this bow, and he apparently played a concert in Carnegie Hall with a different bow, but had this one in the case backstage. Came backstage and it was gone. And so he notified all the folks in town who might have any knowledge of someone trying to sell a bow. It is a rather unusual bow with a tortoiseshell frog. And 2 weeks later, he found it propped into the corner of his door of his apartment. So someone knew where he lived and returned the bow to his apartment when they realized they couldn't sell it.
Great.
So I got this bow, which is, I have not been able to identify it. I've taken it to all the great people in the world for identifying things like that, and no luck. But probably about 1880 and a nice French bow.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you do when you run across, it seems like there are tens of thousands of them in the country, students of the instrument who very genuinely profess to love the cello, but who have not, as of yet, found a way to love the process of practicing the cello. What do you do to motivate your students?
I find motivation has to come from within. And myself, I always felt motivated. I mean, there are times when you just say, okay, I just don't feel like practicing today or whatever. But still, there's an underlying motivation and will to succeed, and goals in mind of what you want to learn and what you want to master. And I think anyone who has that is someone I can identify with, because that's how I was. When someone is lacking in that, I guess some regular goals that you help them set for themselves is helpful. But I'm not the kind of teacher who uses the whip. I tend to be more the encouraging teacher who just says, well, if you don't like that piece, let's find one you do like. And I like to give my students plenty to work on. They have a certain routine, especially the undergrads, in terms of coming into a lesson, and we do some scales first, and then an etude, and then on to the repertoire. And so the etude is definitely a motivating factor week to week. But the motivation thing, I think, has to come from within, and it has to be a result of the love of the instrument, the love of the sound, the love of the technique of playing it, all these things, the love of communicating with the audience. And so, I mean, a lot of them haven't experienced that last part very much. So getting them on stage, getting them past the point of stage fright is an important step also. But I've had a lot of students here at the university where it's not their number one goal to become a cellist, to be in a symphony orchestra, whatever their goal might have been as a cellist. They're, off doing cyber tech sort of things in the business school, or getting a degree in pharmacy, or whatever it might be. And they are good cellists as well, so they play in the orchestra. So I've got students who've ended up all sorts of places. I think that's the nature of teaching in a large public university. Definitely. You have a real diverse student body.
And the routine that you have them in, a routine itself can definitely have a momentum that can keep them going.
Oh, definitely. And I make it really clear to them that I'm not the one telling them what to play for me when they walk in the door, that they've got the other 6 days of the week to be thinking about that and thinking, what can my teacher help me with? And then walk in with an agenda in mind.
Nice.
So I try to get that idea of their own agenda being the guiding factor in lessons, because for me, that's what worked best. I always learned more when I walked into the lesson, knowing what I wanted to play, what I wanted to get better at, and having questions in mind.
That's a great point. Things like when to teach a student vibrato, like for younger students or something. Very often one runs across that idea that when they are ready, when they're like, oh, I'm really anxious to learn vibrato, then they're going to do what it takes to get there. So when the student comes in with an agenda of, I'm really excited about this or that, then they're that much more likely to have the motivation to follow up with it with earnestness and diligence.
Sure. I think it boils down to explaining all sorts of facts about the instrument, how to tune, the way you need to adjust your intonation in a key, how to produce a sound, what the contact point and the weight and the speed do in relation to each other. All these factors, they need explaining. And sometimes I tell a student, oh, here's something that I want to tell you about that I wish someone had told me. You probably have similar experiences. But for instance, you're told always at a right angle to the string with the bow. Well, no, if you want to steer your bow toward the bridge, you pull your bow toward you a little on a down bow or away from you on an up bow, just for a moment to steer it there. And this is like, I tell them it's like the rudder on a boat. Mm-hmm. But little things like that, I think it makes a big difference to do a lot of explaining like that when the student is at the level to need that. And, I have a wide diversity of students. I have some doctoral students who are just very intent on preparing the concerto movement for the competition and their recital program, and they don't come in with an etude each week. And then with the undergraduates, I've got 6 freshmen starting this fall, a huge crowd coming in. And I've already asked all of them to order the Yampolsky scale book and make sure they have Duport and Popper for etudes. And I ask them what they've been working on and give me a repertoire list. And in some cases, they've done quite a bit already. And in other cases, they've got hardly anything except first movements of some things. Mm-hmm. So then you need to, start filling in the gaps.
Well, speaking of repertoire, it's hard to think of anything that is bigger, more significant in our repertoire than the Bach Suites. And there are many people who have made a mark on the research of the Bach Suites, and you have put in a lot along those lines. Can you talk about how you first kind of came to think that you wanted to do some work on these, and then how the rest of the project evolved?
Well, it really came entirely from my own desire to figure out how I wanted to play the suites. And so I wasn't intent at all on producing an edition at first. I simply wanted to come to grips with this whole business of the Kellner copy, which I didn't know about until one of my 2 summers at Banff. Vladimir Orlov mentioned it to me and then sent me a copy. So it was like 1982 maybe. And then I started to explore Anna Magdalena Bach's copy versus the Kilner copy, and it expanded from that. And then I needed to be able to lay out all these sources and compare them. And I really did it just for my own edification at that point. And maybe I can pull it up for everyone to see what I'm talking about. So that's what the cover of the edition looks like, the first page of the PDF, which is, a huge PDF. And if you go to one of these and click on them, everything's with hyperlinks. So you can choose a suite, and then within that suite, you can choose to look at the manuscripts or the score. And so if you say, okay, I'm going to look at the Allemande of the third suite, and it comes up looking very normal that way. With I did all of this in Finale. But if you click on the title or on the page number, it flips you into this view, and that's the first line. You can see down here at the bottom, this is the first line of my edition, and then these are the manuscripts, A, B, C, D, and E, and all lined up to compare. Marks, these are comparison markings so that you can easily see what's different from one to the next. And like I said, I did this all just to figure out what I wanted to play. So then you can just page through it this way. If you have a foot pedal, you could play it off of this and just page through, line by line. But at any point, you can go back to the page number and flip back to this page. And you can go through that the same way with a foot pedal. Or what I'm doing here on the computer is just the arrow key. But then, you go here and boom, you're back in the comparison of the manuscripts. So that's how that works.
Wow.
And let's see, how do I get out of that? Stop share. Okay, there we go.
Wow, yeah. That it's just so amazing, because it seems like no matter how much people contribute to what there is available on the Bach Suites, there's always room for more that then in turn is also valuable to study. They're so fascinating.
Well, it's an endless puzzle, really. We don't have anything in Bach's handwriting except the lute suite. And the interesting thing is how much similarity there is between Kilner's entries and the lute suite version that's in Bach's handwriting. And so that points to some interesting probabilities there, which people can get into more if they want to watch my videos.
I highly recommend. Well, David, what are some of the things that you've got on your plate coming up, either this fall or the 2022-2023 academic year?
Well, I'm going to be going to Utah in September. KYU has a festival there, and he's invited me to be there for a master class and presentation on the Bach and play Tchaikovsky Rococo with a cello ensemble.
Oh, excellent.
So that should be fun. And I've got a faculty recital here on campus in October. And, well, actually, we're starting off the semester with a chamber music program end of August. So a few interesting things like that coming up. Just keeping busy.
Excellent. Kawai has been a guest on this as well. He is, and fortunately, again, there are many such cellists, but he's always so enthusiastic. Like what you say, the coming from within is just when the love, the passion for music as a whole, and then the cello in particular, it just runneth over his cup, so to speak. It's I've never seen him when he isn't just super, super pumped about all things musical and that sort of thing. It's fun when you can help pass that along to a student that kind of hadn't previously found, maybe just had a lower level of overall enthusiasm for music or for the cello, or just kind of hadn't made it enough a part of their lives. Even what you're saying in your own bio, that it had to grow to a point where you knew this is something you just want to pour your life into. And to be a
Right.
part of helping students find that, isn't that, there's nothing like it.
And then on the other hand, I think we can, as teachers, not feel a responsibility to place people in the profession, because even from a place like Eastman, 50% of the graduates don't end up in music. So I think you just have to encourage, and I'm not sure how you motivate, getting back to that, but I guess what I tend to do with students is what I liked to find with my own playing, ways of improving it that helped me. So like my first teacher was not big on scales, but I am big on scales because at a certain point, it actually was a summer at the Blossom Festival with Stephen Gaber. He got me going on scales like 2 hours a day in one key, doing all sorts of rhythms and bowings. And it was wonderful for my technique. That's where my technique really took off. So I just stick to that as a motivating factor in my own teaching, that if I can get my students to work on their scales intensively like that, they're going to benefit from it. And I keep working in my own practice on scales a lot too, but I have varied them in interesting ways. For instance, going up the A string into the higher positions, we all generally do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. But if you are 2 octaves below on the tonic and you start with your first finger, you can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 all the way. And it's a very useful fingering. You find that in like the Prokofiev Symphonia Concertante, all sorts of Rostropovich fingerings that are 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1 coming down the A string. And it makes sense if it's in triplets for sure. So practicing different fingerings, doing things like scales in unisons between thumb and 3 across 2 strings. All these kinds of things I've found that challenge me, I would say, beyond Yampolsky. Like I should probably write a book called Beyond Yampolsky.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, and that the time spent on scales can certainly help with what I think are a couple of important aspects of motivation to practice. One of them is feeling like you're getting return on your investment, not, like for after an hour's worth of practice, you want to feel an hour's worth better. And having that basis of really solid scales can definitely help your technique enough to make you feel like you're getting that bang for the buck, as the saying goes. And then the other thing is when students don't know what to do when they practice, is sometimes, you know what I mean? They're like, well, how do I make a passage better technically? And that scale, whatever scale is in effect at the time, you woodshed through that scale, and it often very much has a payoff in terms of whatever passage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm real big on teaching students how to practice in rhythms, so that they can work out a passage that's all 16th notes, for instance, and do 1 long note and 3 short ones, and then move the long one from the first of every 4 to the second of every 4, and etc. And that kind of thing saves time so much; it's just invaluable.
Nice.
So lots of practice techniques like that I think are very helpful.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, thanks so much for your time. This has been really, really very enjoyable and insightful.
Good. Yeah.
All right. And best of luck with 2022-23. And
thank you.
Thanks. And viewers, we'll see you all this time next Friday. Take care and happy practicing all weekend.
Well, I wish all the viewers a happy weekend of practicing cello. Maybe I gave them some new ideas.
Oh, definitely. All right. Take care, everybody.